In the finest tradition of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Affordable Care Act, the American Recovery Act, and the No Child Left Behind Act, this week we are blessed with another new arrival of a federal law whose authors have ostentatiously named it after the opposite of the real world effect that it's likely to have. And it's not any sort of recent development that politicians enjoy giving wildly misleading names to pieces of legislation so they can then pat themselves on the back while pretending the name and the reality are the same thing. But it seems this phenomenon has grown so far out of control that not even President and semi-animated cadaver Joe Biden and his merry band of night nurses can bring themselves to say with a straight face that this latest woke leftist boondoggle will do anything to bring down the inflation rate. So in an unusual, perhaps unprecedented display of candor, they have been calling this bill what it really is, namely a climate bill, a race hustler bill, and a union giveaway bill, because Democrats literally don't know how to do anything but grow the government, spend vast sums of fictional money, and grease the palms of their sleazy benefactors. And the Chinese communists. Can't forget about them. If Democrats are passing a spending bill, you can bet the Chi-Coms are thrilled about it. Now, what have we got in this one? Something like $367 billion that's going to buy made-in-China solar panels and eco-crucifixes, and we're going to blight the American landscape with them. You know, people give green power a hard time, but if the sun shines 24 hours a day and there's always a gale force wind blowing, renewable energy can easily replace 6% of our power needs. Except not if everybody goes out and buys a stupid electric car like Mayor Pete the chest feeder says we should. Then the 6% goes down to, well, let's just put it this way. If everybody goes and buys a stupid electric car, say hello to the end of household electricity. You best get used to washing your clothes with a washboard and a laundry basin, drying them out with a hand wringer, cooking dinner outside under the stars. Or who knows, maybe the green energy push will have the ironic result of causing a resurgence in the use of home coal stoves. Maybe a few years from now we'll be living in a world where a lump of coal is worth more than a dollar bill. And we will all realize the point that Charles Dickens was actually making. But doesn't that sound just like the sort of world the climate cultists might unwittingly create through a regrettable confluence of stupidity and hubris? The new green future, where mom drives home from the office in her fancy electric car, then cooks supper on the trusty coal stove, and if she's lucky, she's got time to wring out some of the wet laundry before bed. And then it's 30 minutes of book reading by candlelight. And sure, she'd like to read longer than that, but have you seen the price of tallow lately? My local chandler says his wholesale prices have gone up freaking 59%, but nevertheless, as we say our evening prayers tonight, let's give thanks to Al Gore and John Kerry and the Chinese Communist Party for boldly leading us into the new green future we didn't even know we wanted, and making themselves fabulously wealthy and powerful in the process. And that's where the unbridled hubris of this thing comes in, don't you think? Climate change white elephant boondoggles are the single biggest component of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. And this is exactly why these awful, awful bastards have developed the habit of giving these bills, these acts of unmitigated pork barrel pornography, names that don't have the slightest relationship to their contents. You know why? Because climate change is a very, very important topic for wealthy liberal coastal elites. But for the average man on the street, we know that answer. We have all kinds of polling data saying climate change is not an issue that U.S. voters view as being of paramount importance here in the third decade of the 21st century. Sometimes climate change doesn't even finish in the top 10. Sometimes it's in 13th place, right behind, I think the French fry portions at Burger King are a bit skimpy lately. In fact, I'm going to make a claim right here that I think cuts pretty accurately across every other demographic criterion. The only people who are obsessed about climate change are people who spend at least 80% of their waking hours on Twitter and have their pronouns in their profile, right next to the Ukrainian flag. Now, come on, you know I'm right. When you see a copy-pasted tweet in some news article and you see the pronouns and the Ukrainian flag on top, what is the first thing you think? You think, okay, I know literally everything about this person's political worldview now, just from these two little social media talismans. If you approach this thing as a legislative matter, the way we used to approach legislative matters, first the people in the Congress would start by asking, do the people of the country want us, their duly elected representatives, to spend nearly $400 billion on climate change nonsense? And then if the answer was yes, you would draft a bill that was only about that thing. And you would give it a name that was a reasonable description of its actual contents. And if it was something the people really supported, nobody would pay a political price for having voted for the thing. The fact that you're bundling so much pork into one bill and then slapping some fake happy-sounding label on it, that gives the whole game away. That means these assholes know perfectly well the people of the country don't give a crap about subsidizing their climate change fantasy cult. So what do? You lie, of course. You just name the bill after something that people actually are in favor of and pretend it's going to do that thing, because that's how you play 4D political chess, don't you know? But don't feel bad if you're not erudite enough to grasp it all, because it requires a very specific and rigorous private school Ivy League upbringing in order to grasp such advanced concepts. Seriously, I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised by the end of the year if we see a $600 quintillion spending bill that is called the I Love Puppies and Kittens and I Don't Want My Grandma to Die Act of 2022. Oh, one other thing. Are we still going with the claim that the same people who hopelessly botched the response to a Chinese flu virus are capable of directly manipulating planetary weather conditions just by signing pieces of paper? I mean, I'm generally not a great fan of intellectual litmus tests, but I'm willing to make an exception here. If a man looks you in the eye and says with a straight face that he knows how to directly control global temperatures and sea levels, that man is an idiot, and you should laugh at that man. You should laugh at that man good and long and hard, and then you should point and laugh. The last thing you should do is offer him serious rebuttal, for he has said nothing that warrants the dignity of serious rebuttal. You could have told him, he could have told you he was the Queen of France, and it would mean just as little. What, Jim Eagle? It's unlike you to interrupt me in the middle of such a shockingly good opening segment. Oh. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, my intrepid producer informs me that Admiral Danglin Dick Levine, America's greatest fightin' lady sailor, actually has called dibs on being called the Queen of France. Therefore, I regrettably can no longer use that line. And from all of us here at the program, we sincerely regret the error. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where one man's gender-affirming health care is another man's horrific war wound, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I guess we have to talk a little bit about Dick Cheney's little girl, even though everybody else already has. Even though the jokes are so easy, it's rather like stealing candy from a retarded quadriplegic kid whose wheelchair battery just died. Which is to say, we always endeavor on this program, sometimes with more success than others, to avoid the temptation of the low-hanging fruit. But you know what? Sometimes the low-hanging fruit tastes really fucking good. And Liz Cheney is a ridiculous person who richly deserves every last scrap of mockery and derision she has got coming her way. But why am I giving myself such a hard time? This ridiculous loser, this preening poser who thinks 3 terms in Congress make her some sort of eminent figure on the national political landscape. This mistress of miscalculation who managed to lose the primary by 40 points as an incumbent. Talk about your auspicious achievements. She actually had the temerity to directly compare herself with President Abraham Lincoln. And then, since apparently that wasn't a sufficiently mawkish display of unwarranted self-importance, she went on to directly compare herself also with President Ulysses S. Grant. In other words, for becoming a Democrat Party lapdog and slandering her own party's president, Liz Cheney, 3-term congresswoman from the smallest state in the country, thinks those acts place her upon an equal historical footing as the president who saved the Union and the greatest military commander in North American history, who also became president and who had Reconstruction on exactly the right track when he left office, only to have his work undone by the Compromise of 1876, which didn't involve him and was beyond his authority to fix. Liz Cheney fancies those men her historical contemporaries. She sounds like a woman who thinks she has got a political future, but I don't think she really is that delusional. You know what the actual purpose was of this concession speech of hers? It was to create fundraising sound bites for her inevitable quixotic presidential campaign. You heard how she dragged out the fancy ABC producer and television crew to capture the whole thing on film, right? This is Liz Cheney's fun way of saying, if I package myself just right, if I've got some really cool sound bites about Lincoln and Grant and the Civil War and shit, then when I call up the donors begging for cash, they might actually scratch me a check instead of just laughing out loud and hanging up like a normal person would. Also, Ms. Cheney, just a heads up. If your phone felt suddenly lighter when you picked it up this morning, that's because all your new Democrat friends just deleted your number and put your ass on block. And look, I don't want to rain on your parade here. I know there's an imaginary version of this thing in your head where you run an historic dissident presidential campaign and you rake in boatloads of cash. You raise your national profile to a new level of credibility and prominence, and then you slide right into the prime time lineup on one of the fake news networks with a nice cushy 8-figure salary that enables you to live the lavish metropolitan Washington lifestyle that you enjoy so much. But here's the thing about dreams. They're nice to have, but they very often don't come true. But you know what I say? Run, Liz Cheney. Run like the wind. If you think there's this huge untapped base of conservative voters who are ready to reject Trump and go back to the glory days of the Clinton-Bush-Cheney uniparty, and go out there and get that brass ring, girlfriend. Hell, as far as I'm concerned, help yourself to the GOP nomination in 2024. If we want to smash the uniparty and smash the deep state and drain the damn swamp, that could be the best of all possible case scenarios. And here's how. First, even if he plans on being the Republican nominee, there is no need for Trump to contest the primaries. The primaries are not binding. The primaries are meaningless. The delegates vote at the convention just as they always have. It's only really been since 1980 that it's become customary for all the candidates to stand in all the primaries and do this whole silly pre-campaign national campaign and make the presidential election cycle last for nearly 2 full years when it doesn't even need to last for 1 year. So let Liz Cheney run unopposed in the primaries. Sure, who cares? Does anybody actually think GOP delegates are going to go to the convention and not throw their support behind Trump? But you all know that's not my real preference. My real preference is Trump running and winning as an unaffiliated candidate, in which case, great, let Liz Cheney be the Republican nominee. Because in the act of nominating her, the party will be signing its own death warrant. That will be the end of the Republican Party, and it will not come a moment too soon. In a 3-way race between independent Donald Trump, GOP nominee Liz Cheney, and whoever the Dems managed to come up with, including incumbent President Hillary Clinton, because I am clinging to that theory until the day it is disproved, Donald Trump wins that race. He wins it dominantly. And then he becomes our first politically unaffiliated president since George freaking Washington. Doesn't have to worry about re-election, doesn't have to play ball with any party bosses, doesn't owe a damn thing to anybody except his voters, which is as it should be, is it not? But of course, the identity of the president is just one component of the equation that needs to happen if we are to succeed in rehabilitating our system of government and standing it back up on its feet. The first prerequisite, of course, is that Democrats need to not see the inside of the White House for a minimum of 12 years. And I understand there are a lot of conservative voters who prefer DeSantis over Trump, but that is not how we get the 12 years we need. We get that with Trump and DeSantis on the same ticket. With as badly as the Dems are flaming out right now, if Trump and DeSantis join forces, that is pretty close to a guarantee of 3 straight election wins, just like we got in 80, 84, 88, the last time the Democrats were in a similar position of end-stage tax and spend boondoggle lunacy. But there's still the Congress to think about, and it would be a mistake in my judgment to view the defeat of Liz Cheney as meaning there are no longer going to be any people like her remaining in the House GOP, because there are probably still more Liz Cheneys than anybody would care to contemplate. She was just the only one who was dumb enough to go public with her delusional Trump hatred. And if there's a sufficient number of Liz Cheneys in the House, not to mention the Senate, we know there's at least half a dozen Liz Cheneys over on that side, then even with Trump in place for a second term, you risk the same outcome that we got from 2017 to 2019, where Trump was the president, his party controlled both houses of Congress, and they lifted not a single finger to help him do anything the entire time. No elected president has ever received less support from his own party in his first 2 years in office than Donald Trump did. In fact, I think we've still got close to a dozen Republicans in the House who still refuse to say on the record that Russia collusion was a hoax investigation by a crooked Justice Department. And if they can't bring themselves to state self-evident facts about the world, how much then can Trump reasonably expect any assistance from such people when the political heat is on? The answer is, he can't. That's not going to work. In order for this project to be successful, we don't just need non-Democrats inside the White House for 12 years. We also need to populate the Congress with men and women who are clear-eyed about the need for the central government to be radically downsized and drastically disempowered. And you know what else I wouldn't mind seeing? Some sort of legislative act that precludes lying bastard politicians from giving names to bills that have not even a tangential relationship to what the bill is and does. Either that, or we could go completely over the top in the other direction and start retroactively renaming previous laws in the spirit of today's current legislative zeitgeist. I mean, hell, we're doing it with our military bases, right? Why not laws too? We can retroactively change anything we want. For example, we could take the declaration of war on the Japanese Empire and change the name to "Let us beat our swords into cherry blossoms and peacefully coexist with our tiny Asiatic brethren," Act of 1941. And the Civil Rights Act is probably overdue for a new moniker or two, I think. Might as well change the name of that one to the George Wallace Memorial Segregation Forever Act of 1965. And the Medicare and Medicaid Act, let's change that one to Shut Up, Old Timer, and Pay Your Own Damn Medical Bills Act of 1965. I think the Alien and Sedition Act has a hopelessly outdated name too. I say let's change that one to Welcome to America, Enemy Saboteurs. Please Make Yourself at Home Act of 1798. And given the events of last week, I think we'll need to go ahead and change the name of the Presidential Records Act to the No, I Totally Promise We Won't Rifle Through Your Wife's Underwear Act of 1978. And so we finish Wednesday's episode in the same location where we began Monday's episode, inside Melania Trump's panty drawer. But it could be worse, I suppose. It could be Admiral Danglin Dick Levine's panty drawer. And I don't think any of us are ready for that, frankly. Thank you very much indeed for watching and chatting and commenting. I won't tell you to smash the like button and pulverize the notification bell and pummel the subscribe link within an inch of its life. But I still wouldn't mind if you did. Have a pleasant tomorrow. See you Friday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.